Hey guys, in today's video I want to teach you how to use TypeScript with Redux. So this is going to be based on React. So let's just get straight into it. So we want to first create our React template. So in your terminal, in whatever ID you want, type in npx create react app, and you do need npm installed for this. Specify the whatever directory you want, so I'm just saying the current directory, and then you want to say template TypeScript. So this will just use the normal create react app template, which you guys are probably familiar with, and it actually incorporates TypeScript into it. So it deals with the configuration and the setup, so we don't have to. So this will just take a moment, and I'll get back to you guys when this is done. Okay, so now that we have our template, let's add in some extra dependencies. So you want to type npm I. I think the first thing we're going to want is Axios. We're also going to want Redux with react-redux as well. I think we need types for react-redux and types for redux. So we're also going to add in redux dev tools extension. And I think for now that should be it. I've probably forgot something, but we'll come back to those later. So while that's going in the background, let's take a look at our folder structure. So we have all of our TypeScript files here, so these are .tsx extensions, and I do cover the basics of TypeScript in another video, so I'll put a link up to that. So let's open up the app.tsx, and actually let's also just in a new window run npm run start. So this will just open up, this will just run a local server on localhost 3000, as you can see here. So this is just the basic template. So we're going to remove all of this. I'm not really interested in any of that. Also going to remove the imports. So let's get started by creating our reducer, our Redux state. So let me just check. It's still installing, but I think we can probably get started. So let's create a new file, and this is going to be our store. So store.ts, because it's going to be a TypeScript file. Let's say, actually we have to first import a couple of things. I don't think my IDE will pick up on it until this is done, so I'm just going to give this a moment. Okay, so now that we have everything installed, let's create the store. So import from Redux. We're going to import create store. We're going to say store is equal to create store. So this accepts a reducer and some middleware. And we're also going to install thunk, so just npm I. I've actually already installed it, so just type in npm I redux-thunk and the types for redux-thunk. So yeah, I've already got these two, but yeah. So let's now create our root reducer. So let's create a folder. So reducers, and then aside here, let's create a file called root reducer.ts. So now our root reducer is going to be, so we're going to have to import combine reducers from Redux, and then we're going to say root reducer is equal to combine reducers, and it's going to take some reducers. Let's also just make sure to export this as default. Let's also create our first one. So I'm actually going to be using this Pokemon API, which I'll show you guys in a moment. So I'm just going to call this Pokemon reducer.ts. So some default state. I'm just going to leave this like this for now. We're going to come back to that and change it with types, but just for now we're going to leave it as an empty object. And let's actually also create the interface for default state I for interface, and let's just leave it as empty, and just give this a type of default state I, and then let's say Pokemon reducer is equal to, so we're going to first get the, so we first get the state, and then we get the action, and from this what we want to do for now is actually just to return state, and we want to specify that this has a return type of default state. Then let's export this as defaults, the Pokemon reducer. types of the state is going to be default state I, and action for now I'm just going to say any. We're going to come back and change this, but just for now leave it as this. Let's also do this is equal to default state. Yeah, so make sure the default state is on the right, not the left of the type. Okay, so let's import that. So import Pokemon reducer. Let's say Pokemon is Pokemon reducer. Okay, so now let's import that. So import root reducer, and let's place that here. So next we want to use the DevTools. So import compose with DevTools. We want to say compose with DevTools, and then we actually need the middleware. So I think that should come from Redux apply middleware. So here we're going to apply middleware, and then in here I just want an array with thunk, and let's also import that. Okay, so now we're going to export default or store, and now let's hook it into the React side of things. So if we go to our TSX, and this error is just because it seems as though the types aren't being installed. So let me just do npm I. I've had this issue before where for some reason when I use npx create react app with a TypeScript template, it doesn't install the TypeScript types, the React types. So yeah, that should fix that. I'm going to remove strict mode, and I'm going to instead put provider, put this inside of it, remember to put the comma at the end, and then import provider from react-redux. Provider needs a store, so this is going to be store, and that is going to be imported from our store that we set up earlier. Okay, so now we have this hooked in. This is not currently working. Oh, I think this is just meant to be on its own. Yeah, so it's just one middleware we're applying here. So now in the TypeScript in the app.tsx, I'm just going to put test here just to make sure everything's working, and yeah, we get test. Okay, so now let's create our first action. So I'm going to create a new file called actions, and I'm also going to show you guys the API we're going to be using. So this is the API we're going to be using. It is just the poke API.co. So I was just looking for a fun API, and this seems cool. So what we want to do is be able to fetch, to call out to this endpoint here and get this data. We don't really care about all of the data, but we just care about some of it. So let's get started on that. We're going to create a new action. So I'm going to call this Pokemon actions.ts, and I'm also going to create another file called Pokemon action types.ts, because we're gonna, you can put this all in one. I think it's a bit much, and I think if you have a good naming convention, then it shouldn't be a problem. But yeah, we're going to put all of our types in here to not confuse it with the action. So the first thing we're going to need, actually let's start off with the action. So generally an action would look something like this. So we have the action name, so get Pokemon, and then we have dispatch, and then here we actually make the request, and then we would also export this as default. Actually, let me just export this on its own. So this is how you might normally do your TypeScript calls, your TypeScript calls, your Redux calls. And with TypeScript it's very similar, but there's some slight differences. So let's import dispatch from Redux, and let's give this a type of dispatch. Let's also make this async, and I think we should also install Axios. Axios comes with types built in, so we don't have to install type/Axios. So let's create a try catch, and what we're gonna do, oh, this should be a equals, this should be a, greater than sign. So the try, we're going to say const. Well, first we want to say that we're loading the data. So let's say we want to do something like dispatch type loading, or like loading Pokemon. Now you can do this, but one thing you might notice is that we can just put whatever we want here, and so we're not really taking advantage of TypeScript. So first let's decide what sort of dispatches we want. So we want a loading, we want a success, and we also want something to handle the error. So let's do the let's create some types for these. So if I go to, oh, I just realized this should actually all be in the Pokemon actions, not the Pokemon types. So let's go to Pokemon types now. I'm going to export a constant Pokemon loading, and this is just going to be Pokemon underscore loading. So you've probably done something similar to this with just normal Redux. And I want 3 of these. So this one's going to be Pokemon fail, and this one's going to be Pokemon success. Okay, so that's our 3 types, but then each of them are going to have different payloads. Well, actually these 2 will be the same, but this one will have a different payload. So what we can do is say interface Pokemon dispatch, let's just say Pokemon loading, and this is going to have a type of, the type is going to be the type of this, the Pokemon loading. So this might seem a bit strange why we're doing type of here, and it's quite simple. If I remove this, you'll see we get an error, and the error is because this is a value. So Pokemon loading is an actual string value, but what we want is the literal type. So one easy way to do that is just to say type of, and so now it will take the type of this, which is this. I hope that makes sense. So this is going to be one of our dispatch types. We also need to do the other 2. So let's do interface Pokemon fail. So let's just say type, it's going to be type of Pokemon fail. And finally for Pokemon success, it's going to have a type which is type of Pokemon success, but it's also going to have a payload. Now the payload is going to include some of this data here. So if I just turn this into a JSON, it's going to include some of this data here. We don't really care about all of it, so I'm not going to map out all of it, but we do care about certain parts. So let's start off with the abilities. So I'm just going to close this out. So this is an array. Let me just close everything. Okay, so this is an array with objects inside of it. And let's see, this one has ability inside of the abilities array. The object has ability, which is also an object, and also has, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, and it also has is hidden and slot. So there's 1, 2, 3 keys that we care about, and specifically I'm only going to care about these 2. So let's create a type to handle this. So let's say, I'm just going to do it at the top. So Pokemon ability is going to be an object, and it's going to have ability, which will have name as a string and URL as a string. We could add in these 2, but I don't really care about this. I'm just going to leave them out. Okay, so that's one of these stats. Another one that I want to do is the sprites. So the sprites is just an object. So type Pokemon sprites, and the only one that I really want is the front default, and this is going to be a string. And the reason I want this one is because it just shows the front of the Pokemon. The other one shows the back, and we don't really want to see that. So we have this, the sprites, which we only care about this one. And now let's do these stats. So stats is an array. It has base stats and then a stat object, which has the name and the URL. So I'm just going to take the name and the base stat. So Pokemon stat is going to be equal to the, so it's going to have base stat, stat, and name. So base stat, which I think is a string. Oh no, it's actually an integer, a number. It's going to have stat, which is an object, which has name, which is a string. So now we have these three abilities, three properties. I think for now we should just leave it at that. The other stuff isn't too interesting. So yeah, we have Pokemon ability, Pokemon sprites, Pokemon stat, and yeah. So payload is going to include all of these. So let's just say it's going to be an object, a JSON object. It's going to have abilities, so abilities, which is going to be an array of Pokemon ability. It's also going to have sprites. So let's say sprites, and this one is, actually this one isn't an array, so this one's just fine how it is. And it's also going to have, I think the last name is just stats, yes, stats, which is going to be Pokemon stats and an array of that. Okay, so we have all of the data we need. So now we're going to create a type to handle all of these, and that might sound a bit confusing, but I'll show you what I mean. So Pokemon dispatch types is going to be equal to, so it's either Pokemon loading, fail, or success. So these are the only possible ones. So let's also export this, and I think we should probably also export these. So because we're going to probably end up using them in the reducer. And we also need to export these as well. So yeah, pretty much everything needs to be exported. Now if we head back to the actions, what we can do is, this is a generic, so this accepts an action. So we can specify the dispatch type. So this is going to be, let's import, what do we call it? Pokemon dispatch types from Pokemon dispatch types. And then here we can say Pokemon dispatch types. So now this is throwing an error, and that is because type loading Pokemon is not assignable to, yeah, so we changed the order. So here it says loading Pokemon, but it should be Pokemon loading. So let's also import all of our strings, so fail, success, and loading. Okay, so now we want to make the API request. So let's say const res is equal to await, and you have to make sure to put async here. And this is going to be Axios. So let's import Axios. And this should be a get request. So the URL should be this. And I'm actually going to change this to template literals. Say Pokemon, and then accept Pokemon. So this Pokemon here is going to come from the parameter, which is going to be of type string. And then let's handle the error. So if this goes bad, we dispatch Pokemon fail. And if it goes well, then we do dispatch type Pokemon success. And you can see we're actually going to get an error, and I think that's because I forgot to import that. Yep, Pokemon success. So yeah, so now we get an error. That's because that Pokemon, so when we have Pokemon success, it's actually expecting the payload property, and that's missing. So let's add that in. And payload, you can see, has these fields. But what we can actually do is just do response.data. Now I just want to cover something. So response.data actually contains all of this, but in the types, if I just go to them here, we're not covering everything. We have ability, we have the front default sprite, some of the Pokemon stats, but you can see something like game indices. We don't have this in the TypeScript, so what this means is we're still going to have the data, but we're just not going to be able to use it. So you should know exactly what you want and what you're expecting in the format and the type, and then you can use it in the correct way with normal TypeScript. So yeah, I hope that makes it clear. We're not taking out any of the data, but we're extracting it for our use, but it's still there. So that's how I want you guys to think of it. So coming back here, we have pretty much all of this done. Hope I'm not forgetting anything, but I think this should be fine. Now let's actually look at the reducer. So before we created this default state I, so we can keep that, but we're just going to change some stuff. So we're going to say loading is going to be a boolean. We're also going to say Pokemon is going to be of type, and then we actually need to have Pokemon. We should probably just create a Pokemon type here, and this Pokemon type is going to be pretty much this, and then instead I'm going to replace this with Pokemon type. So what we can do is say Pokemon type and just import that. So, and I'm also going to put a question mark here to make it a an optional field. Then I'm going to say loading by default is equal to false, and Pokemon, actually we can leave that out so it's undefined by default. So actions are now going to be different. So actions are actually going to be this Pokemon dispatch types. So that's what our actions are going to be. So if I do action.type, actually let's just do a switch statement. So switch action.type, let's say case, and you can see we get autocomplete, but I don't want to use those. I actually want to import it. So if I do Pokemon success, Pokemon fail, and Pokemon loading, then I can do Pokemon fail. And here all I want to do is return this return object. Let's say loading is false. So I'm not going to deal with any error handling, but in the real case, in the real world scenario you would, but I'm not going to deal with it now. Let's do Pokemon loading next. So Pokemon loading, and let's just return loading is true. Then finally let's do Pokemon success, and for this one we just want to return loading as false and Pokemon as action dot payload. And you can see it's not throwing an error because payload has type Pokemon type, and this is also Pokemon type or undefined because we put the question mark. So that now handles our reducer. So all of the dispatches here that we've typed here are being handled by our reducer now. So we're storing that data. Okay, so there's actually one thing I forgot to do, which is in our store, we have to export the type of the store, and it might not seem clear now. So what I'm actually going to do is show you what happens if you don't. So let's say state, what is it, Pokemon state is equal to use selector to get our state, our redux state. Let's say state is equal to, and then let's say I want to return, because we know in combine reducers we have Pokemon, so state.pokemon is a thing. So let's try to get that state.pokemon, but we can't, and that's because we don't have the default root state doesn't have this. So instead we have to wrap this and give this a type. So state, we have to give this a type. So you might be wondering, what type do we give it? What we can do is get the return type of root reducer. So let's do that. If I go to store, we're going to export this. So export type root state, or let's say root store, and it's going to be equal to the return type of, actually I think it's return type of root reducer. So it might seem a bit strange. Return type is quite clear, just tells you the type of whatever you put in here's type. But we can't put a value, so instead we have to get the type of the value, and then this tells us the type of the return of that type. So it's a bit confusing, but yeah, we want to use this now. So if I copy this, and we have to import it, so import root store. So now you can see we do have Pokemon here, and even on Pokemon we have loading and Pokemon. So yeah, that's quite nice. Okay, now let's just do some simple stuff. So let's create a input with an on change, and let's create some state. So Pokemon name, set Pokemon name. That's going to be equal to use state, where initially it's just going to be an empty value. Let's just quickly do the handle change. And I forgot the type of this. I'm just going to copy it from here. So it's event, which is of type React, change event, HTML input. So yeah, and we're going to set, we can actually do this in line. So set Pokemon name to e.event.target.value and handle change. Okay, and let's put in a button submit on click, or let's change it to search. What it's going to do, we want to actually execute the action from earlier, so this get Pokemon. So let's import get Pokemon, and let's do so let's say handle submit, and all it's going to do is say get Pokemon. Actually, we first need to dispatch this, so say dispatch is equal to use dispatch. I'm just going to dispatch get Pokemon with Pokemon name, and if you remember, Pokemon name is what we pass here, which is how we get the results for the correct Pokemon. And let's put that in here, so handle submit, and we can actually inline this as well. Okay, so now we want to actually get the data. We do have Pokemon state here, so I'm just going to create a div, and aside of this, let's do this. Actually, no. Let's do Pokemon state dot Pokemon. I'm not going to do any sort of loaders or anything fancy. I just want to show you guys the data. And actually, I think the easiest way to do that for now might just be to console log Pokemon state. Okay, so we've done a lot of coding and we haven't really looked at much, so let's take a look at this. So Pokemon returned undefined during initialization. Oh, that is because in our root reducer, what we've got to do is a default. So default return state. So yeah, so now it's working. And now let's search for Ditto. And if I open up Pokemon, you can see we have all of the data. So that's great. Although as I said before, we do have even the fields that we didn't previously account for. So let's now come back here and just show the data. So let's do first just show the sprite, I guess. And actually, before I even do that, let's do a conditional. So Pokemon state.Pokemon, and then we want to show the data. So let's say image tag, where this is going to be Pokemon state.Pokemon.sprites default. This question mark here is just because this is possibly null. I think if we remove this, yeah, it actually works fine, and that's because we did a check here. So you don't actually need that. But if it's possibly null, that's the I forgot what it was, but it's actually quite new to Babel. So yeah, that is what that was. Let's also add in a, let's see, what other data do we have? The abilities, so let's loop through those. So let's do Pokemon state.pokemon.abilities, and then let's do a .map. I'm just going to return a paragraph tag and say ability.name. Let's leave it at that. Let's search again, and now we have the image and the abilities. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now. I hope this video was useful. I'm not going to go through and show all the data, but you can see it's there, and how React is how TypeScript is helping us. I hope this video was useful to you guys. Hope it helps you understand types and how we use that with Redux, and especially with redux-thunk. So the dispatch types here, I think this is quite important, and probably the most important part of this video is just this right here, and setting up our types and also handling them in our reducer itself. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. See ya.